In the summer of 1940, Nazi Germany controlled a huge part of Europe, from Norway down to Spain. Paris had been captured, and the British Army had just barely escaped from Dunkirk, leaving most of its tanks and heavy equipment behind. The German military, the Wehrmacht, seemed unstoppable. On the French coast, German officers took propaganda photos, staring across the 20 miles of water at the white cliffs of Dover. German newspapers confidently claimed the invasion of Britain was just days away. And yet, the invasion never happened. The ships never sailed, the paratroopers never jumped, and German tanks never landed on British soil. By late September, Hitler quietly cancelled Operation Sea Lion and turned his attention east toward the Soviet Union. So, what really stopped the invasion? It was a combination of military mistakes, logistical nightmares, and plain bad luck. This is the story of how an unstoppable ambition met an immovable obstacle. Hitler never really wanted a long, bloody war with Britain. His writings make it clear he hoped the British Empire would agree to a peace deal, leaving him free to conquer the rest of Europe. He saw the British as racial cousins who would eventually see things his way, but Britain's Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, flatly refused to negotiate. This put Hitler in a tough spot. He had to show he was willing to invade to force Britain to the table. In early July, the German High Command drafted Operation Sea Lion. The plan was incredibly bold. Land 160,000 soldiers in southeast England, capture London, and force Britain to surrender, all within a month. German officers casually described it as nothing more than a large-scale river crossing. That statement, however, ignored a huge problem. The English Channel wasn't like a river. It has massive tides, powerful currents, and violent, unpredictable weather that can change from calm to a raging storm in hours. The challenges didn't stop there. Germany's entire army was built for fast-moving land wars, not for complicated attacks across the sea. They had no purpose-built landing craft, no experience with amphibious assaults, and no trained officers for such an operation. The army that had just crushed France was forced to make a plan from scratch with the wrong equipment. The German Navy argued the plan was suicidal with their limited ships. The Air Force, the Luftwaffe, confidently promised it could win the battle alone. Everyone, including Hitler, secretly hoped that just the threat of an invasion would be enough to make Britain surrender. When Churchill didn't back down, the Germans had to quickly make their bluff look real. The head of the German Navy, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, found out about the plan to invade Britain only after it was being drafted. He wasn't consulted at all. His first reaction was blunt. The German fleet was not up to the task. He wasn't wrong. The German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, had been hit hard during the recent invasion of Norway. It had lost a heavy cruiser, 2 light cruisers, and 10 destroyers. What was left of the German fleet had to face Britain's mighty Royal Navy home fleet. The British had 5 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 30 destroyers, all within a 2-day sail of the Channel. It wasn't a fair fight. It was a guaranteed disaster for the Germans. The Royal Navy wasn't just bigger. It was the most powerful and experienced naval force in the world. To make matters worse, Germany's smaller torpedo boats were based too far away to be effective and didn't have enough fuel to fight for long. Raeder's own staff ran simulations that showed a single British battleship could destroy an entire group of troop-carrying barges before the Luftwaffe could even respond. The Royal Navy didn't need to win a big battle. It just had to break through and sink the transports. The only way the invasion could possibly work was if the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, could gain complete control of the skies over the Channel. It had to keep the Royal Navy's powerful ships away from the fragile invasion fleet. Without that, the German soldiers on the barges would be slaughtered. The Navy's official position was clear. Even with air supremacy, the invasion would be an incredible gamble. Hitler, always a gambler, decided to press on. For the German Navy, it felt more like a suicide mission. When you think of a sea invasion, you probably picture the special landing craft from D-Day, with ramps that drop down onto the beach. For Operation Sea Lion, Germany had nothing like that. Instead, the Germans gathered about 1,800 river barges. These were flat-bottomed boats designed to haul things like coal and wine on calm inland rivers, not soldiers across the stormy English Channel. Engineers welded steel plates onto the front and called them landing craft. but it was a joke. These barges had no keels for stability in rough seas and weren't designed to land on beaches. Soldiers would have to wade through deep, cold water just to get ashore. Moving tanks was an even bigger problem. To carry one tank, engineers had to tie two barges together and lay wooden beams across them, a very risky setup. During a test run, some of the cargo slid into the sea and 3 soldiers were killed. There was also a critical shortage of manpower. The plan required 1,400 skilled pilots for the barges, but Germany only had 400. They planned to use regular infantry soldiers with no sailing experience to pilot the rest. On August 30th, a storm sank a dozen of these barges while they were still in a friendly harbor. The soldiers began calling them coffin boxes, a joke that was dangerously close to the truth. The head of the German Air Force, Hermann Göring, made a bold promise to Hitler. He boasted that he could destroy Britain's Royal Air Force, RAF, in just 4 days and force Britain to surrender in 4 weeks. His pilots, who had won easily in Poland and France, were confident they could do it. The plan was simple. First, destroy the RAF's planes and airfields. Second, bomb Britain's aircraft factories. Finally, attack ports and food supplies to starve the country into submission. The first phase of the attack, called Eagle Attack, began on July 10, 1940. For weeks, fierce air battles raged over southern England. The RAF was pushed to its limit, with its pilots exhausted and its airfields taking heavy damage. Then, on August 24th, a major mistake happened. A German bomber, likely off course, accidentally dropped its bombs on London. In retaliation, Churchill ordered an immediate bombing raid on Berlin. Although it caused little damage, the raid on the German capital, which Hitler had promised would never be hit, was a huge psychological blow. Hitler was furious. He ordered the Luftwaffe to stop attacking RAF airfields and instead start bombing British cities, especially London. This campaign of terror bombing was known as the Blitz. This decision, made out of anger, actually saved the RAF. It gave the battered British airfields and exhausted pilots a much-needed break to repair and regroup. Meanwhile, Britain's advanced radar system gave them a critical 20-minute warning of incoming German raids, allowing their fighters to intercept them more effectively. German intelligence failed to realize how important these radar towers were and didn't target them until it was too late. By then, the Luftwaffe was suffering heavy losses. On September 17th, Göring had to tell Hitler the bad news. They couldn't win control of the air. That admission sealed the fate of Operation Sea Lion. Even if the first wave of German soldiers had made it to the beaches, they would have been in a very dangerous position. They needed to secure the area and move inland quickly. That critical job fell to Germany's elite paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, led by General Kurt Student. The plan was for 3,000 paratroopers to land by glider at dawn and capture the high ground above Dover. But they only had enough transport planes for 1,200 men and a small number of gliders. Worse, RAF bombing raids had already destroyed half of their glider fleet on the ground. German intelligence made another huge mistake. They failed to notice that the area the paratroopers were supposed to capture was now defended by over 200 anti-aircraft guns. The surprise attack would have been a slaughter. The planners considered a night drop to avoid RAF fighters, but Student argued against it. He knew that without any lights or beacons, many of his men would land in the English Channel and drown. The final plan was a daylight drop, but the Luftwaffe could no longer promise to protect them. When Student briefed Hitler on September 14th, he asked what would happen if the RAF was still a threat. Hitler just shrugged and said, "Then we wait until they aren't." 3 days later, the invasion was postponed forever. The paratroopers never jumped. An invasion depends entirely on logistics, the invisible system of supply. In 1940, a single German army division needed 350 tons of supplies every single day to keep fighting. The invasion plan called for 9 divisions in the first wave, meaning they would need over 3,000 tons of food, ammo, and fuel delivered to the beaches every 24 hours. German planners came up with some wild ideas to solve this problem. One was to use a bomber to fly fuel across the channel, but the test plane exploded on takeoff. Another idea was to have submarines tow giant floating fuel tanks, but the submarine crews refused, calling it a suicide mission. The final, desperate plan was to load fuel cans onto the empty barges returning to France. But river barges need weight, or ballast, to be stable in the open sea. Replacing that ballast with fuel cans would have caused many of the barges to capsize in the rough channel waters. Supply officers did the math and came to a terrifying conclusion. The invading army would run out of ammunition in 3 days, food in 5 days, and fuel in 6 days. After that, the powerful German tanks would be stuck, becoming easy targets for the Royal Navy. It was an unsolvable problem that proved the invasion was doomed from the start. The English Channel is famous for its terrible weather. The best time for an invasion with calm seas and clear skies was a very short period between September 20th and October 5th. After that, autumn storms would make any crossing by barge impossible. The clock was ticking. On September 7th, German weather forecasters saw what looked like a 10-day window of good weather on the way. Seizing the opportunity, Hitler immediately set the invasion date for September 21st. The frantic preparations kicked into high gear, but the good weather never came. Instead, a massive storm system rolled in from the Atlantic, bringing heavy rain and powerful winds. The seas became far too rough for the flimsy barges. Reconnaissance photos from September 17th, just 4 days before the planned invasion, showed huge waves crashing over the harbor walls in France. It was clear the barges would never survive the crossing. At the same time, the Luftwaffe's air war was failing. The two key conditions for the invasion, good weather and air superiority, had both fallen apart. On September 17th, Hitler met with his commanders. The mood was grim. Admiral Raeder argued for a delay, while Goering admitted the air war was lost. Hitler listened, and then calmly postponed the invasion indefinitely. He told his staff that Sea Lion would remain a threat to keep Britain guessing, but in reality the invasion was dead. German intelligence for Operation Sea Lion was a complete disaster. The intelligence agency, the Abwehr, produced a 300-page handbook for the troops filled with useless information like pub opening times and the phone number for the Dover harbour master. The handbook also made dangerous mistakes. It claimed Britain had only 300 tanks in the south of England when the real number was closer to 1,200. Even worse, the maps of the landing beaches were from World War I, over 20 years out of date. The coastline had changed so much that one area marked as a firm landing site was actually a swamp. The Abwehr also completely missed that 2 divisions of Canadian soldiers were positioned exactly where the main German army planned to land. When German commanders on the ground asked for new reconnaissance photos, they were told the planes couldn't fly because of the RAF, the very problem the invasion was supposed to solve. To top it off, a German spy in Britain mistakenly reported that the beaches were protected by invisible exploding shells. He was actually looking at simple anti-tank obstacles. The Abwehr believed him and included the warning in their briefings. Confidence in German intelligence became so low that army officers started buying tourist guidebooks, hoping they would be more accurate than their own spies. It was a level of incompetence that showed Germany was not ready for such a massive undertaking. While Germany was struggling, Britain was preparing for a fight. By September 1940, the island was ready for total war. Britain had 1.5 million men in its volunteer home guard, a citizen army ready to defend their towns and villages. They were supported by 27 divisions of regular soldiers who had been re-equipped after the disaster at Dunkirk, and hundreds of new anti-tank guns. The British plan, devised by General Edmund Ironside, was brutally simple. He didn't want to stop the Germans on the beaches. Instead, he planned to let them land, get them stuck in the narrow beachheads, and then attack them with overwhelming force from all sides. The beaches themselves were prepared with desperate defenses, including a system of pipes that could pump oil onto the water and set the sea on fire to burn the invasion fleet. Britain's radar network gave the Royal Navy enough warning to send destroyers to intercept the German barges within 30 minutes of their departure. On the night of September 17th, the same day Hitler postponed the invasion, Prime Minister Winston Churchill wrote that he went to bed with a lighter heart. He had seen intelligence reports that German ships were pulling back from the ports. The immediate threat was gone. The threat of invasion had terrified the country, but it also strengthened its resolve. Posters with slogans like "You can always take one with you," appeared everywhere, encouraging civilians to fight back. In the end, these defenses were never needed. The invasion was defeated not by a battle, but by Germany's own failures.